So today's topic, life-changing movies.
Specifically movies that made you want to change your life.
Me specifically, Josh McGrain. Yes, not that like everyone who watches this movie is going to be life changed, but for me, yes. I had Henry watch them over the last couple of days. What'd you think?
Yeah, so the two movies that you had me watch were Into the Wild and The Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Yes.
So, Into the Wild, directed by Sean Penn. It was a good story. I do feel like there were some weird choices made, especially with like the camera work and just some of the art direction. But the main character, Wall, I think he did a pretty decent job and really committed to the role, especially losing all that weight. There were just some aspects of his character that kind of just annoyed me. Maybe if it was just because I knew him in person, like he was pretty kind of pretentious, or like my ideas are right, and yeah, your idea of going out into the wild and just like finding out what really matters, like to the base meaning of life. I get that, yeah, and I can appreciate it and respect it, and it's cool, but that's not necessarily total freedom. I mean, like, what are you gonna do out in the wild?
Yeah.
All the time, like
it's definitely not realistic.
But it is. That happened.
I mean, it did happen, but I mean, like, from a perspective of like you wanting to follow his footsteps, it's not realistic in the sense of like throw away all your possessions and live off the land and find out what it means to be a man on your own. It's very romantic, the idea, and I really like that movie. Just sticks in my head because of that reason. Like, there's been so many times where I've just been sick of like trying to make money and trying to make it and trying to like live my dreams. You know, it's tiring. There's a lot of effort you have to put into it, and just the romantic notion of like I'm just gonna throw it all away and be a vagabond and live how I want, when I want, where I want. And the reason that movie changed my life is because I watched it at the end of like high school, which was like the epitome of like, who am I? What am I going to be?
Yeah.
What am I doing with my life? You know? And that movie gave me perspective that nothing else has similarly. Like, no book, no music has ever like put in my head that like no matter what you do it for yourself or do it to be better. And yeah, it just gave me a lot of like self-clarity.
Yeah, and it definitely does that, and that was definitely its purpose as an art piece. But one thing that I thought was, I don't know if this was like intentionally contradicting, but the main character says you shouldn't put so much value or a word along those lines in relationships. Like, you shouldn't have so much stock in your relationships with people. But the entire movie, besides when he's like in the magic bus, he's depending and benefiting and growing from the relationships of the people he meets along his way.
Yeah. Which I think this is a real character. This is a real person in real life. And I think he had some issues. I don't think he was all mentally stable. And they show that by when he like goes into town and he like freaks out and he sees himself in like a suit being like a corporate person, even though he was like in a city for like one day, like, and he freaked out. So I think he definitely has some like mental hangups. And I'm not saying like this is who I want to be and how I want to live my life.
Yes, it is, Josh. You've said that to me every single time I've seen you, and it's getting kind of out of hand.
I'm sorry. So it's not like I don't watch this movie as seeing him as like a role model. It really is kind of a cautionary tale, this movie, with how it sadly tragically ends. But I think there's lessons you can learn from it, and I think even though he says what you say about relationships, like you said, it is the most important part of the movie is the people he meets and like the person he becomes because of those relationships. And I think you can take away a lot from that aspect, even though that's not the point he was trying to make.
So yeah, no, he's not a role model.
Mm-hmm.
But he, especially at the time that you saw it the first time, he's like a peer. And a few years ahead even, which is potentially better.
Mm-hmm.
It could be like an older brother of sorts. You can see an older brother as a role model. But what I'm saying is you see someone who's at that coming of age like point in their life, and instead of going through those like society structured beliefs on what you should do with your life, you go to college, you get married, you have kids, and you buy a house, and all that stuff isn't bad. Like that, like maybe that might have somewhat been said in the tone of the movie, just from the perspective of the nuclear families being shown, were like the upper middle class families who don't have as much emotional connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see it at that point in your life where you're deciding, am I going to go to college and do what my parents say, or am I going to figure out something else?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a pretty important thing to see, because college is not for everyone. And I understand from the parents' perspective, you want every opportunity and every growth potential to be like actualized.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just not the case. I mean, so many people flourish better without ever going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And so just laying down a path and sticking to it without even like considering alternatives is probably one of the biggest takeaways. While it's really cool to like see how he lived his life and just survived out in the wild, both in the actual wilderness and the wild of Los Angeles or other big cities, or in the middle of the desert in these weird nudist communities.
Mm-hmm.
It just gives you like while it's in a movie, it gives you slightly different perspective
Mm-hmm.
on different aspects of life from every range.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool in that aspect. I kind of want to talk a little bit about Sean Penn, because you noticed as well that there was some weird.
Yeah, Sean Penn's like very artistic director, which can be like a good thing sometimes, and just like why are they filming it like this sometimes?
Yeah, I have a few specific things that I noticed. Like, so there was all the slow motion scenes like weren't captured in slow motion,
No.
and so their frame rate is just halved, and it doesn't look good.
So when did this movie come out?
2006?
2000, yeah. So that was a big thing back in 2006. It was like this really weird like fake slow motion where they shoot it in 24 frames and then they slow it down and repeat frames. And it was really big. Like for some reason, like every movie did it. They thought it made it look really like gritty, and it's just not fun to look at like in the modern age. There was a few other like weird choices in this movie with like the camera work and even like the storytelling where it's just like confusing, and I feel like it tries to be really artistic and it just like is just strange choice.
Yeah, and like the style of it, I feel like just changes every other shoot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't ever really fit the tone of the movie
Right.
as like a whole. And so that kind of like takes you out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one thing in particular that I originally was like super like put off by, but then afterward, when I thought about it a little bit more, I liked it a lot. It was when it happened once, maybe twice, where there was a little bit of fourth wall breaking, and he like recognizes the camera, or at least looks at it.
Yeah.
And like when he was on the bridge or something like that, and it was a really weird scene. There was no dialogue, no real like build up to it. It was kind of just like you're placed there for like a few seconds. There's some music, and then it cuts out, and he's back walking around on a hike. But what I think that was since in the movie they never once really referenced or showed him using a disposable camera, that since the real guy did have a disposable camera, I don't know how often he used it, but like there's a photo of him that he took of himself, so I'm assuming that he had taken a few others along the way. I'm assuming that they used the actual camera as the like device that of the disposable camera, that was documenting his visual journey through it, even though it was like a constant rolling thing, even though it was a produced and edited movie. So so I think that's kind of one cool like tool that they used, but for the most part, a lot of the weird things that they tossed in were kind of just, like I said, off-putting and didn't really fit the tone.
Yeah. I will say, on the opposite end of that spectrum, the one thing they do really well is I really love the characters in this movie, like the ones you're supposed to like the parents are kind of meh, but they're real people, so it's kind of sad the way he like views his parents. But anyways, back to the subject. Like, I really like the characters, like the hippie couple that take him in are just like lovely people.
Yeah.
And I would love to meet people like that and have them in my life. The old man who tries to adopt him.
Yeah.
That scene is so heartbreaking. But I loved him. He was such a sweet character. And they don't have characters in movies like him, like just very genuine and like down to earth and lovable. I just want to hug him.
Stubborn old man.
Yeah. And like the main character himself is very likable in his like youthful vigor that he, like everything he does, like you said, it can be off-putting that he's like, so this is the right way, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, I love how free he is and how comfortable he is with himself. And just everyone he meets is a likable character, and I think they did that really well.